Hey guys, I'm back with a book review that I said I was going to do in my last video, so the surprise is dead if you already know what it's going to be, but it is Wild by Cheryl Straid. This is, at its core, a memoir from the point of view of a 26-year-old. At least she was 26 when she did what she did in this book. However, when she wrote it, she was a lot older. This book was published in March of this year, but the actual story takes place in 1995, so it's been a little bit since she's done what she does in this book, but the reason there's a hiking boot on there is because she hikes the Pacific Crest Trail, or at least most of it, by herself, 26 years old, and a female, which is pretty ambitious, if you ask me, especially since she had no backpacking experience whatsoever. So the reason that she even decided to do this was because it was basically a really hard time in her life. Her mother had just died from cancer in her 40s. She was married for a little bit, and that sort of, her mother dying made her marriage crumble, and her family split apart. She was actually doing heroin for a bit. So yeah, her life was kind of going down the drain, and then one day she was in a store and happened to see a guide for hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, and she kind of nonchalantly picked it up, looked at it, and was, whatever, put it back down, and then her mind kept going back to it. She eventually decided to do it. She grew up in Minnesota, and they were pretty poor, so she was used to having to go outside and to use the outhouse to go to the bathroom, not having running water and things like that. So she was hardy in the sense that she could do camping, serious camping, but she was not prepared at all for having to carry a very large pack on your back and hike thousands of miles on a trail. When she is in the hotel in California and she is trying to get the pack on her back, she can't even lift it up off the ground. She has packed so many things into it. In the beginning, she's hiking in the desert and she's super hot all the time. She sees strange animals, and she's just completely so worn out and unprepared because, first of all, her backpack is way too heavy. But as the trail goes on, she gains strength, she meets people that push her to do better, and it's such an environment that you immediately become comrades with anybody else that you meet because you're both trying to do something that is extremely difficult. The Pacific Crest Trail is basically a harder version of the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail has a lot of stops along the way, a lot of little overhangs where you can sleep under and you don't have to worry about pitching your tent, whereas the Pacific Crest Trail, the stops are much farther apart. You spend a lot of nights out in the wild around strange animals with just you and your tent. There is some parts in here where I was just like, girlfriend, what are you doing? You are so unprepared. It was so bad. And there was other times where I was impressed by her ability to keep pushing on. There are parts where the Sierra Nevadas are snowed in and she just can't hike it, so she has to actually take a huge detour and take all these buses and roads, and she hitchhikes plenty of times. And she hitchhikes with guys that could possibly be really bad men. They're scary people. I mean, hitchhiking is not a fun thing to do. She just has these situations that are so dire that she just has to do it, and if she doesn't, she's going to get in serious trouble. Either she's going to die from starvation or dehydration or from hypothermia. This is extreme stuff. I like the writing style. It sort of jumps between how she's doing on the trail, and then it'll jump back to when she was little, tell stories about her family. It'll talk about her and Paul, or maybe how Paul being her ex-husband, or how she was doing heroin with this other guy, and she was just living from paycheck to paycheck. I mean, you get a huge amount of her backstory, but the main focus is on the trail, and as you get farther and farther on in the book, I feel like more and more of it is based on the trail because it becomes such an integral part of her life. It was one of those defining moments for her, hence her writing a memoir about it so many years later and it doing so well. The interesting thing is that Cheryl Straid, that Straid is not her original last name. When she got divorced from Paul, she decided that she was going to pick a new last name to start, since she was kind of a new person, so it was a very appropriate name for what she ended up doing. I picked this up because this summer I've kind of gotten into the idea of hiking trails, and though I'm not going to go jump up and hike the Pacific Crest Trail, I figured it would be interesting to read. I'll probably start on a much smaller scale, and then maybe someday in my life I'll hike the Pacific Crest Trail. But after hearing about this book and ordering it, I found another book that I actually forgot to include in my last book haul, and that's A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. This is a book about the Appalachian Trail, and this is the trail that I just said was a little bit easier to do. There's more people, it's more populated in the sense that there's a lot more stops along the way where you can get food and rest for a bit. So I am going to read this book soon, just to sort of fill my need to read about the Appalachian Trail and hiking and backpacking, everything about that, because I find it really interesting. Overall, I would rate the book a 5 out of 5 stars. It was awesome. There are, of course, many emotions that I felt on this because I didn't want her to get in serious trouble. I wanted her to complete her goal, but there are points where I was just like, what are you doing? You are, oh God, why did you do this? You're so dumb, Cheryl, you're so dumb. But that's good because it means you're really invested in the story. So a 5 out of 5. Anybody who enjoys a good memoir, of course, definitely read this book. People who like adventure stories and kind of suspenseful stories too. There are points where you're like, oh my gosh, how's she gonna survive this? How's she gonna come back from this? I mean, her toenails fall off, her boots are too small, her toenails turn black, and they fall off. Just like all these little random things, and you're just like, oh, that is so gross. If you like those stories, if you're interested in hiking or backpacking, that sort of stuff, this is a good book. It makes you excited about the prospect of doing it because that satisfaction of actually doing it at the end is so great. But thank you guys very much for watching. If you have read this book too, and feel free to share your enthusiasm in the comments. Subscribe, of course, if you like hearing about books. You can follow us on Twitter and friend us on Goodreads. Thank you guys very much, and I'll see you later.